The night sky over the South China Sea is wide and quiet. Cloud layers drift slowly, almost without shape, folded into the darkness. The air moves in long, steady breaths. Far below, the water reflects nothing. It holds only a faint suggestion of light from distant coastlines, too far away to break the stillness. It is the kind of night where sound does not travel far, where distance feels larger than usual, where a single point of movement, high above, can disappear simply by continuing forward. This is the setting in which Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 last passed into certainty. A clear night, a quiet sky, nothing unusual in the atmosphere itself, only the vastness of space and the subtle hum of a world in motion. There is no urgency here, only the open darkness, and a sense that the horizon is wider than anything we can measure. On an ordinary night in March 2014, a routine flight crossed this wide stretch of sky. It held passengers settling into long hours of travel, crew members performing familiar tasks, a plane moving along a scheduled line drawn across continents. For a while, everything happened as expected. Lights, altitude, the measured steps of aviation that usually leave no impression at all. And then, somewhere between one moment and the next, the pattern shifted. A change too subtle for those on the ground to feel in real time. A movement that would, later, become the center of questions that remain open even now. The plane continued through the darkness, but the certainty around it began to loosen. There is nothing dramatic in that moment when described from a distance. Just a plane, still airborne, still moving, and then a silence. Flight 370 departed Kuala Lumpur shortly before 1 a.m. The destination was Beijing, a familiar and well-traveled route. Weather conditions were calm. Communications followed their normal sequence. For the first portion of the flight, everything aligned with expectation. Climbs and turns, radio exchanges that sounded like countless others before them. At 1:19 a.m., the final routine words were spoken from the cockpit. After that, the signal that usually marks a handover between airspaces did not arrive. Instead, the plane's transponder stopped transmitting identifying information. Radar on land continued to follow a target for a while. It moved in a direction that was not part of the planned route. A turn, slow and deliberate, away from the South China Sea and back across the Malaysian peninsula. But radar alone cannot tell a story. It draws only movement, not intention. It offers lines, not reasons. Later, satellite data would show that the aircraft continued flying for hours. It followed a long arc across the Indian Ocean, a lonely path stretching over open water, far from usual air corridors. After that final connection with the satellite, nothing more was recorded. Just the quiet, weightless absence of signals that never came. Everything after this point is distance, and speculation held at arm's length. In the days that followed, the first turning point was not a discovery, but the absence of one. Search aircraft and ships moved along the intended flight path. They found only open water. Gradually, the search shifted west. Pieces of radar information were examined again. Satellite logs were interpreted in new ways. The long arc across the Indian Ocean emerged from this slow process. Yet the ocean remained empty. Months turned into years. Then small objects began to appear. A wing flaperon washed ashore on Reunion Island. Later, additional fragments appeared on the coasts of Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, and Mauritius. None of these pieces answered the larger questions. They only confirmed that the aircraft had reached the ocean. They hinted at the violence of its final descent, but not the reason for it. These fragments were quiet things, weathered by salt and time, light enough to drift across thousands of kilometers. They told us only that the story did not end in the South China Sea. but they did not say what happened in the hours between departure and disappearance. The physical evidence linked to Flight 370 is limited. Fragments of the wing, portions of interior panels, small, unremarkable pieces that once formed part of a much larger structure. Each object carries the erosion of long travel across the ocean. Edges softened, paint faded, surfaces marked by the slow, persistent touch of waves. They sit on tables in quiet rooms, examined under clear lights, their histories read only from the shape of the damage. But these marks do not speak clearly. They reveal part of a path, not the whole of it. The absence of the main wreckage leaves a large space unfilled. Much of the aircraft remains somewhere underwater, beyond the reach of available mapping and search tools. The seafloor in that region is complex, marked by ridges and deep valleys. Silence lies heavily over it. There are no personal items that definitively trace the final minutes. No recovered devices that capture sound or images. No cockpit recording. Nothing that tells us what the interior of the plane felt like in its last hour. The evidence we have is quiet and incomplete. Over the years, many ideas have been offered to explain what happened. None have been proven. All remain suspended in uncertainty. Some believe the aircraft experienced a sudden mechanical failure, a loss of systems that could have left the crew unable to respond. Others suggest that a deliberate action may have guided the plane away from its route. This theory rests on the controlled nature of some early turns. But control does not necessarily imply intention. It is also possible that the aircraft continued on autopilot until fuel exhaustion, a long unbroken path ending only when the engines lost power. This aligns with some interpretations of satellite data, though not all analysts agree. Another line of thought points to fire or decompression, events that might have incapacitated the crew while the plane continued on a programmed course. This too remains unconfirmed. Still others suggest navigation errors or instrument failures, a chain of small misreadings that gradually place the aircraft far from its intended path. Each theory offers fragments of possibility. None fit perfectly, none answer every question, and so they remain in a quiet circle, revisited often, but never settled. Today, the Indian Ocean continues its slow, continuous motion. The waves rise and fall with no memory of the searches above them. Wind patterns shift across the surface, carrying salt and air toward distant continents. The South China Sea remains as it was that night, wide, dark, and open. Flights continue to pass overhead. Lights trace thin lines across the sky, unnoticed by most below. In Kuala Lumpur, the departure terminal still echoes with the sounds of routine travel. Rolling suitcases, announcements, the quiet murmur of people moving toward destinations they fully expect to reach. The coastlines of Réunion and Madagascar stand unchanged. The water arrives in small waves, smoothing the sand, carrying whatever it carries. Time moves on around these places, but the event itself remains still, held in the moment where certainty stopped. Flight 370 exists now as a shape made from both presence and absence, a flight that took off as expected, passed through the sky as so many others do, and then moved slowly into a space where signals fade and distance becomes uncertain. Years have passed, searches have come and gone, the world has changed in ways large and small, yet the story remains suspended, not concluded, not understood, carried forward only by the unanswered questions that accompany it. Somewhere, on the floor of the ocean, the final pieces lie in silence, unmoving, untouched by light. The sky above continues as always, clouds drifting, air shifting in long, slow patterns, and the memory of the flight remains there, in the wide quiet of night, in the distance between what is known and what is not, in the soft, unresolved stillness that surrounds a story without an ending. No conclusion follows, only the quiet and the time that continues beyond it.